mute myself. Oh, no, first I should introduce Dr. S.Khemlani is from U.S. Naval Research, and he presents online from Washington, D.C. So let's welcome Sunny. So go. So I'm mute myself.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Tianci, and really all the other organizers for putting together this wonderful workshop and for the invitation to talk. So as Tianci said, I'm S.Khemlani, and I'll first start by just stating that I really wish I could have been there in person with you all. Because of the time difference, I won't be able to stick around much after my talk, but I really hope for continued opportunities for interacting with this exceptional group. So as Tianci was mentioning, I work for the U.S. Naval Research Lab, and my lab focuses on building high-level computational theories that try to capture and abstract the mental processes that underlie human reasoning in various domains. And what I'm going to talk about in this talk is what these theories are, how they're distinct from more recent generative AI efforts, what they buy you, and recent efforts amongst colleagues to explain and predict specific patterns of human reasoning behavior. I'll start with the obvious observation that many AI systems today show what appears to be incredibly impressive reasoning abilities. I don't know that much of the public debate has focused on whether this is bona fide human-like reasoning. It sounds like that's sort of what the question that Barbara had in the earlier talk, right? In Tony's talk. Of course, system designers argue that we're getting closer to general purpose reasoning abilities. And as you saw from Tony's talk, scientists are more cautious about that. But the tenor of the discussion often focuses on the answers that AI systems deliver, right? Here's a puzzle that Melanie Mitchell tested through different chatbots, right? So Julia has 2 sisters and 1 brother. How many sisters does her brother Martin have? Right? The correct answer, you don't have to do this yourself. The correct answer is 3. And new language reasoning models can really solve this by correctly and walk users through their inference while previous systems couldn't. And what I really want to point out that this is that in measuring how well an AI system reasons, designers mostly care about the conclusion it produces from the set of premises. And they treat this by doing this, though, they treat this behavior as kind of an artifact, right? It's a product that's produced by the system. This practice of treating reasoning as a product and an artifact is really useful for separating between sensible conclusions and errors. And so it's a perspective that's kind of entwined into many aspects of building and training AI systems. For example, often human reasoners will help to direct and correct the mistakes of these systems. They'll label imagery or flag inappropriate content. As Sonia was mentioning, they'll provide meaningful feedback to AI-generated text and media, sort of massive post-training. This is all after the system has been already trained on internet-scale data. And all of these actions are ways of injecting human reasoning artifacts into training pipelines that push, in order to push AI models to perform better. But there's sort of a gloss that we make when we take these artifacts as face value. Because we know that individual reasoners vary, both dramatically and systematically in the way they reason about abstract and real-world domains. We know that different reasoners can spontaneously discover different strategies over the course of the same problem or task, and that they can disagree with what counts as a sensible inference. And for individual reasoners, exogenous factors like time pressure or stress or sleep deprivation or endogenous factors like psychiatric conditions, they can all disrupt reasoning. So given that, what does it really mean when some AI company or some research paper argues that AI can reason much like a person, right? Given that people show such profound forms of systematic variation in the way they reason. Sometimes it means AI systems reason as well as the best human reasoners. Sometimes it means AI reasons like most humans, or it reasons according to our intuitions of how humans should reason in this domain. Or it reasons like the humans we tested at this particular data center at this particular time, right? Again, there are advantages to treating reasoning as an artifact. You can use those artifacts to build machine reasoning systems that learn how to reason without hand coding inferences or logical reasoning rules, right? That's huge. And I think there's lots of data to suggest that the reasoning patterns produced by these state-of-the-art generative techniques, actually, what I should say is that I think there's a lot of data to suggest that the reasoning patterns produced by these state-of-the-art generative AI techniques are fundamentally alien to what humans are doing. right? So, for instance, many recent papers have claimed a correspondence between humans and reasoning models, right? They argue that the tokens produced by reasoning models can be used to model reaction times in humans. Ivan Venkov, Jeff Bowers, and their colleagues have recently published this critique of that work. They show that the reasoning trace length is often actually unrelated to model performance. That's what you see in the single figure that I'm highlighting. What they were doing is they were looking at these reasoning models, and all they did was ask for single and double digit adding. And when you look at what humans do, obviously double digit adding is much more difficult than single digit adding, right? That's a very standard pattern. And for these reasoning models, they take just about the same number of tokens, right? Um, and so why so in previous work, right, what explains that correlation between token length and reaction times? Why does that sort of correspondence happen in previous work? Well, the answer that these authors and others have argued is that language reasoning models have been trained on data sets where more difficult problems are paired with longer solution demonstrations, right? So they're really simply reproducing trained training induced output patterns rather than what humans actually do. What these systems are not doing is allocating additional computation in response to the problem's difficulty, right? So Tony's excellent talk this morning. I'll talk about one more challenge to these models, right? So Tony's excellent talk really presented a variety of challenges to language and reasoning models, and he's done much more extensive testing of these models than our group has. But I will say that we have results in our laboratory that really complement and extend some of the results that Tony described in his talk. So we found that state-of-the-art vision language models have profound difficulties evaluating spatial relations, right? Vision language models, also known as multimodal language models, are like LLMs, but they are specifically designed to interpret images as input. And all we did was really test these vision language models using simple, uncluttered images of objects on tables, and we asked very simple questions like, is the following statement true or false? The blender is to the left of the cupcake, right? Even in this simple question, you get a variety of responses based on different models, right? The performance differs across these models for what really should be a pretty easy question, right? Human performance should really be at ceiling for this. And what we did, we didn't ask just this question, right? Well, in fact, what we asked, we did something slightly more subtle. We asked this question: is the following statement true or false? The blender is to the left of the cupcake. We also asked, is the cupcake to the right of the blender? Both true statements. And then we also asked false statements, right? Is the following statement true or false? The blender is to the right of the cupcake, and the cupcake is to the left of the blender, right? And really what we were looking for is there a difference between how the system processes true relations versus false relations? And in fact, there is, right? There's a huge difference. These false relations produced abysmal performance, really slightly better than chance. We actually, I mentioned one prompt. We did a number of prompts, right? We did this fill in a blank prompt, fill in both blanks according to the image. The blank is to the left of the blank, right? Or the blank is to the right of the blank. And again, you see, this is a much more difficult task than just answering a true or false question. But you'll see that even though it's more difficult, the relation actually can radically reduce performance as well. For whatever reason, it was performing better for when you ask about the left than the right, which really shouldn't happen, right? I mean, of course that shouldn't happen. So what's the lesson? Why does this matter? The lesson is none of the patterns that we discovered in this line of work should really have any meaningful impact on how humans reason about spatial relations. We were asking about trivial sorts of questions. And human reasoning is robust and resilient to all these trivial sort of surface level manipulations. So let's shift the focus a little bit. Let's shift the discussion a bit to talk about how humans reason. If you want to understand what humans compute when they reason, which is the goal of my group, and if you want to understand how reasoning abilities, say, develop or break down, or why sometimes humans just need a second to think through a difficult problem, right? If you want to build systems that are calibrated to human teammates, it's paramount to focus on the processes of reasoning, right? This is, it's paramount to focus on what people mentally represent, how those represent computations permit or rule out certain sorts of computation. And much of the work I'll describe investigates the nature of the processes people engage in when they reason. So let me try to intuitively illustrate some reasoning processes in action. Consider this set of interlocking gears. Here's the question. If you turn this highlighted crank clockwise, what is the direction that last gear is going to turn? I don't know if you can see my mouse, but see that last gear? Which direction is it going to turn? Clockwise or counterclockwise? Now, I'll just give you a second to think about that. So the answer is clockwise. And the answer doesn't really matter. What's actually more revealing is that it might have taken you a while. And if I'd added more gears, it would have taken you a little bit longer. So why is that? I think there's a lot of evidence to support the idea that to solve problems like these, people construct a small scale representation of this gear arrangement that roughly mimics the structure of what it represents. So in this case, we might have a bunch of tokens representing gears and some limited idea of how one gear affects another without representing relative positions or the interlocking teeth of the gears or any of that information, right? So of course, this, as Tony and Barbara were talking about, this simplified representation is called a mental model. And if it's true that that reasoning really depends on the construction and scanning of these models, then the more mental models, the more sort of possibilities we have to construct, or the more structurally complex these models are, or the more scans that are necessary to analyze the different elements of the models, the harder it'll be to get the right answer, because there are more and more opportunities for reasoning processes to get disrupted. So this general idea was proposed and interrogated over decades by Phil Johnson Laird, my longtime collaborator, and has been explored extensively by a broad community of researchers interested in how people build mental models to engage in many different cognitive activities, from abstract thinking and reasoning to discourse representation to event segmentation. Here's just a sample of papers and books that have investigated the role of mental models in human thinking. And I'll mention that one of these papers is, of course, by Barbara Tversky, who's speaking later in this conference and who's done foundational work on this in this topic. So by exploring the nature of the possibilities that people construct, you can actually ask some interesting questions, right? Here's one of them. When do people start to represent possibilities? So Toby Gerstenberg and his colleagues explored this idea in the domain of counterfactual reasoning. They gave participants videos of balls. You don't have to worry about these particular examples. It's the overall idea that I want to mention. They gave participants videos of balls colliding with one another, and then going into a sort of goal area that's highlighted in pink in these diagrams, or not going into the goal area, right? And they show that people's eye movements can actually track places that a ball could have traveled but didn't actually travel, right? Meaning that eye movements have access to a mentally represented counterfactual possibility. That was their argument. One of the reasons I find this work so compelling is because it can help reveal the time course of when possibilities get constructed, when they can be accessible to other reasoning processes. So my collaborators and I simulated their studies to explore how and when possibilities become accessible, to yield inferences about the causal relations that could be perceived in this domain. In other words, the idea of inferring that these one ball hit another, caused another to go into the goal, we can figure out when that inference, that causal relation will come online for a participant, right? When it'll be accessible. Toby's work and that work is consonant with other eye tracking and pupillometry work, which can really help establish the time course of the construction of possibilities. And all of these data sets really suggest that people construct possibilities serially in a kind of piecemeal fashion, right? Let me show you what I mean by the high-level piecemeal construction of possibilities. So here's another example in the causal domain from my group. In one line of studies, we gave participants just really simple abstract causal premises, like the sentence above. The presence of a particular preservative causes a substance to decay. Excuse me. And they had a kind of inference where they had a kind of interface where they could construct possible situations, right? So here they said, okay, the task was, please list any and all situations that are possible given the statement. Then they had this interface that allowed them to sort of construct sentences that describe possibilities. So something like they could add as many possibilities as they considered appropriate in whatever order they considered appropriate. So the preservative is absent and the substance doesn't decay. The preservative, it's also possible that the preservative is absent and the substance actually does decay, and so forth, right? They could construct these possibilities. What I want to highlight is that participants don't consider all these possibilities equally. They list certain possibilities 100% of the time, right? They consider those possibilities first. And when you look at that 100% of possibilities, the 100% of those 100% listed possibilities were constructed first before any other possibility. And of course, people are faster to list them. And similar patterns, I'm just listing this one pattern from our group. Similar patterns can be found for many different abstract relations, including quantifiers and indicative conditionals and deontic relations, etc. So to simulate the processes of the sort of piecemeal possibility construction, my group has built a computational cognitive model called mReasoner, which is designed to take verbal premises and analyze them the same way that humans do. It probabilistically builds mental models, scans them to draw conclusions, and then rebuilds models to consider alternatives. And at least in the isolated domain of spatial reasoning, of sort of 1 and 2D spatial reasoning, it can do the same thing using images as input. We've used mReasoner to model laboratory data about how people reason about a variety of domains: quantity, space, time, cause and effect. But instead of focusing on any of these specific modeling results, let me walk you through a few cases of insights as this process might lead you. Okay, so here's one. So people reason in ways that violate the constraints of formal frameworks such as symbolic logics, decision theory, probability, and so on, right? There's lots of evidence to suggest that. And we want to be able to explain why they do so systematically. So, for example, this is a graph from a paper of ours that looks at sentential reasoning, so reasoning about and, or, if, etc. So, for example, here's an inference that's valid in just about every existing normative framework, including all truth functional logics and Bayesian models of cognition. I can tell you. Here's what the inference is: A or B, but not both. Does it follow that A or B or both? In other words, does an inclusive disjunction follow from an exclusive disjunction? And just about every truth functional logic will say, of course it does. Logical norms that dictate that this should be valid. Oh, here's a example of this in using actual content. So I had an apple or a banana for breakfast, but not both. Does it follow that I had an apple or banana or both? Again, all forms of logic suggest yes. Humans absolutely reject this inference. Humans never accept it. And that sort of makes sense if you think that people's primary inferential goal is to draw conclusions based on the possibilities that they construct, right? The conclusion allows for a possibility that the premise explicitly rules out, right? Well, why does this matter? It means that sometimes humans make bona fide logical errors, but sometimes their responses reflect their priorities for mentally simulating possibilities over maintaining truth, right? Okay, it's also possible to explain why some reasoning puzzles are inherently and systematically easier and faster for people, while other reasoning problems are hard. Excuse me. In one line of work, we gave humans and mReasoner a battery of quantificational reasoning problems, and we tracked how well humans arrived at correct inferences. And we compared that to mReasoner's deliberative reasoning operations to show a sort of inverse correlation between the two. Namely, that the more operations that mReasoner required to build a correct alternative possibility, the harder that was for participants. The harder that problem was for participants. Now, this methodology is actually a lot like what I presented earlier, that what modern comparisons between human reasoning and what modern language reasoning models purport to do. In other words, the results notwithstanding Bauer et al.'s paper, or that more reasoning tokens suggest a better ability to deliberate. But what I wanted to point out is that our methodology explains what is happening when humans deliberate, right? They are constructing and alternatively structured representations of possibilities and scanning them in various ways, and that every one of those new possibilities and additional scans imposes the kind of cognitive tax and an opportunity for the reasoning process to break down. And so that's why you see this inverse correlation. So in this way, mReasoner can explain what makes some problems more difficult than others. Of course, different people exhibit systematically different reasoning strategies, and it's possible to mine data from various types of tests to extract kind of isolated clusters of performance. We've used mReasoner to model these patterns. So in one line of work, we and other colleagues have used mReasoner to model individual differences in syllogistic reasoning. That is, when people reason syllogistically, they can be kind of divided into groups of high, medium, and low performing participants. And our system was able to model why some people produce very similar and common errors, as well as actually how these other high performing individuals can recover from their initial reasoning errors. Right? So not just the error, but also the recovery. The general opportunity here is to use systems like mReasoner to simulate the kinds of common strategies reasoners adopt in a particular domain, as well as maybe even explain differences between, say, novices and experts in that same domain. I want to actually jump up a level to think about the sort of broader theoretical implications of the theory, right? So the model theory, the mental model theory argues that model scanning operations are really fundamental to all forms of reasoning. Spatial reasoning, of course, but also additional forms of reasoning. So my colleagues at Georgetown thought that if that's true, and if it was possible to foster visual spatial scanning procedure, the ability to carry out visual spatial scanning procedures, that might transfer to more abstract forms of reasoning. That's what the model theory should predict, at least. And that's actually what they found. So what they did was they ran a naturalistic study on high schoolers in Virginia, where half the participants received pedagogical instruction on geospatial information processing through a class that they took called the geospatial semester. And this involved things like map reading, spatial scanning, etc. While a set of matched controls enrolled in an upper level science class that wasn't specifically spatially enriched. And they found that reasoning improvements actually transferred to abstract non-spatial reasoning and used longitudinal neuroimaging to show that there are actual neural changes over time that could predict those reasoning results. So anyway, so the point is that once you start modeling the processes that humans engage in when they reason, it's actually possible to turn the lens back to AI reasoning systems and ask what they're doing and what we want them to do. So Tal Linzen and his colleagues at DeepMind did exactly this. They sought to benchmark not just logically accurate reasoning, but how well an AI system can mimic human inference patterns, using mReasoner as a sort of a benchmark for that sort of thing, right? So humans can be modeled by mReasoner, and how well does the AI system match what mReasoner is doing? So I'll try to actually shift a little bit. Of course, AI systems continue to develop rapidly. I mentioned these large reasoning models that engage in things like test time scaling and other techniques to dynamically question and revise outputs to arrive at better answers. But again, here too, I think that the thinking about reasoning as a process can be monumentally insightful, because when building these systems, if what you actually care about are the processes that these systems use to arrive at accurate answers, then you might start to ask questions that really challenge their engineering strategies. Does an inference execute in a reasonable amount of time, right? Can it be done assuming limited amounts of background knowledge, right? So the novices may be experts, but not an agent that digested the entire contents of the internet, right? Does it require a reasonable amount of resources? It shouldn't take many gallons of water or cost hundreds of dollars to answer an arithmetic problem. Okay, so I actually have video on this slide, so I want to just quickly shift, share my slide real quick. Give me one moment. I want to share this next slide, the video on this next slide. Okay. Okay, can you see my full screen here? Can everybody see my full screen? I'm not hearing anybody. I hope they can. Okay, I'm going to go on just assuming that you can. Okay, oops. 1 second. Okay, so this is what I wanted to show. So one thing that you can do is actually leverage the computational efficiency you get by building models in sort of everyday reasoning tasks, right? So if what mental models are doing is simplifying the environment
Excuse me, can you,
to permit faster. Okay, sorry, can I heard somebody
we have
speak.
25 minutes slot. It's not a 45 minutes. So could you,
Oh, okay. So should I wrap up? Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yes, you are using, yeah. Can you finish as soon as
Okay.
possible? Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. I should just be a minute or so. There's one more minute here to this talk. So I guess what I wanted to mention was that what this work is showing is that.
Excuse me, we
Sorry,
don't
go
see
ahead.
your shared screen.
Oh, you don't see my shared
We
screen.
see you.
Oh, you just see me. Okay. For some reason, it just says it's shared. Okay. Can you see this shared screen? Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess my point was that one thing that we can do is to leverage computational efficiency, leverage the computational efficiency you get by building mental models, right? If mental models simplify the environment and permit fast processing for humans, we can actually provide that same advantage to AI systems and treat models as stable scene representations, right? Smooth out perceptual input using models. Um, so they can be used, the spatial models can be used for, computing with spatial models can be used for things like real-time analysis of a scene's stability, right? Looking at the state of when a scene is stable, when a visual display is stable, and computing that stability online, which actually permits time-locked human-machine teaming in real-world environments. So what this example is showing is that, this is a complex display. You can issue commands like vacuum directly to the right of the leftmost relay, and it'll be able to find that particular, part of an electrical panel, uh, because it's using mental models to reduce the perceptual input. So let me just wrap up here real quick, which is. Which is to say that, I'd argue that there's a big difference in developing AI systems that have learned to reason by digesting reasoning products and between building systems that try to mimic the reasoning processes in humans. And I've tried to describe how these latter systems can help us better understand the factors that limit or enhance human reasoning. This is one way of explaining ways in which human thinking is flexible and adaptable, and simultaneously why it's prone to systematic biases and errors. And I'd argue that this approach can address some computational problems contemporary AI systems face, and that it can permit the development of strategies that are appropriately calibrated for human cognitive abilities. So let me just end there and just take a quick second to thank all my collaborators on these projects, and thank you all for your time.
So thank you. I think we just move on to the next slot. Okay, we
Okay.
stay in contact.
Okay.
Can we upload your slide video?
Yes, I'll make sure to upload my slides. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
Right. Next talk will by Peter from DeepMind.